If you will take your scripture out of your bulletin and read silently with me as I read our scripture. The title of the message today is from Philippians 4:8 through 9, and it is What to Use to Fill Up Your Mind. It's sort of like our children's message this morning. It's really important to begin the day filling up our mind with God's love and our soul with God's love, and really important to end every day with filling the mind of our souls and all our being with the message of God's love. This is Paul speaking to the Christians in Philippi. Summing it all up, friends, I say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Put into practice what you have learned from me and what you heard and saw and realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into His most excellent harmonies. I remember when I was a young Christian, I read this scripture, and I thought, wow, this is one of the secrets of living the Christian life. So ever since that time, I've tried to focus on the positive things, the noble things, the true things, the gracious things, the loving things in life. And I've watched a number of friends of mine who are Christians focus on all the negative things. And I watch their spirituality and I would say their mental health go downhill because they focus on negative things in other people, negative things in their community, negative things in their family's life. And just they went from darkness to deeper darkness. They just constantly focus on negative things in their whole life. You could sum up many of my friends' lives later on as Christians as, ain't it awful? Ain't it awful that? Ain't it awful? Ain't it awful? I know that's bad English, but it really catches the feeling. And really, the Christian's life isn't it wonderful? Of course there's going to be negative things, but isn't it wonderful? Isn't that glorious? Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that an answer to prayer? Isn't that tremendous, you know? I loved my cousin Linda Gilbertson, who just passed away this last week. But isn't it wonderful? She's not suffering anymore. She was in significant pain the last few weeks of her life. Isn't it wonderful? She was so longing to be with her dad. She lived on a ranch in, tell me if this doesn't sound like Wyoming, Antelope Gap, Wyoming. One time I sat down to dinner and I said, man, Aunt Mildred, that was at their ranch, this is delicious beef. And she said, that's antelope. Antelope eat our alfalfa that we irrigate, and so we eat the antelope. And boy, antelope usually eat a lot of sagebrush, and oh my goodness, you talk about sage, their meat is really strong sage, but Aunt Mildred had a way of fixing antelope that was as good as any beef you've ever had. And poor Pete, he was so negative about everything, negative about all these neighbors and everything else, but he loved his daughter Linda. This is my Uncle Pete. And every time he had something to do, when Linda was growing up, he'd say, Linda, let's go fix the fence. Or let's go see where that calf got out. Or let's go see if their deer are down in they lived in a beautiful bluffs along the antelope bluffs along the what they call the Wheatland Flats is all irrigated. And so Linda and her dad really, really got close. And isn't it wonderful? I think to myself, I miss Linda a tremendous amount. But isn't it wonderful Linda's tearing around heaven with Uncle Pete, fixing fence, looking for cattle that got out, just having a good time. She missed her dad so much when he passed away. And so it's important to reframe everything in a positive way, even death. And I really try to do that, and I want to encourage you to do it too. And if you put into practice what you learned, you'll be more focused on the positive things God is bringing into your life. And you'll see how everything is working together, even things that are negative. And your life will become a life of harmony and peace. And so if you're constantly saying, ain't it awful? Let me encourage you to say, isn't that wonderful? And use better English. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that Raven has a heart for the children of the Dominican Republic? Isn't it wonderful we've been blessed to have her and her brothers grow up in this church? Most churches don't have that. They don't have homegrown missionaries. Raven is working with residents of a nursing home before she is on her flight, and she contacted me. One of the residents in her nursing home is a former pastor of Westside Christian Church, Bob Langston. And I've known Bob for like 45 years or longer. And she says every time he sees her, and he found out she was a member of this church and I was her pastor, have Ron Cobb come and see me. So say a prayer for Bob Langston. I'm going to go and see Bob in that nursing home. And she contacted me just before she left for the Dominican Republic, so this is the first I've known about it. But I'm going to bring Bob my book, Fun and Laughter in Recovery. Otherwise, why recover? Because when you're in a nursing home, it's real easy to get negative. You know, you're in pain. You're seeing doctors and nurses all the time. You're taking pain medications. Everybody at that age, Bob Langston's age, has arthritis, you know. And I want him to help reframe, and I know Bob well enough to know that he's already doing this. He's meditating on these positive things. And I wanted to give you a take-home paper to study, and then there'll be a test next Sunday. So I'm going to ask Misty and Jalen if they'll hand out this take-home paper to you. Those of you on YouTube, what this take-home paper is, it's taking these things that Paul said here in Philippians 4, verse 8, and it's getting a lot of different translations of those words and some synonyms for those words. Don't forget the folks in the very back, too. Chase, I want to thank you for the great hymns and everything you've done in the worship service today. I just really don't take you for granted at all, and you selected some really wonderful praise songs and hymns today, so thank you very much. Those of you on YouTube, if you want to get a copy of this, just text me at 785-305-0549, and I'll make sure you get a copy of this wonderful list of things to meditate on. So I'm using Paul's words and translations, different translations of those words, and other synonyms of those words. So let me encourage all of you who are hearing my words today, every day meditate on these things. Meditate on the things that are holy. When you read the news or hear the news, every so often something really holy comes up. Meditate on that rather than who murdered who, or who stole from who, or who went to jail. Meditate on what is holy. Meditate on what is glorious. One clear teaching of the Bible in the Old and New Testament is our creation is absolutely wonderful. Driving down from Lincoln, Nebraska on Highway 75, there was a thunderstorm south of Lincoln headed for Sabetha, that was absolutely magnificent. It had 4 different clear areas where it was raining. The power of God in that thunderstorm was glorious. Meditate on what is worthwhile. One of the things I meditate on constantly is all of you who work with the food pantry here in South Brown County and the hundreds of people you help. It's so worthwhile what you're doing in the name of Christ. Again, something very similar. Meditate on things that are commendable. Whenever I saw a soldier do something out of the ordinary, I would talk to that soldier and say, thank you for doing that. That's way beyond your military job, but you picked up what really needed to do. And, the really good commanders, they would give awards for commendable service, and they would praise the person in front of the entire battalion and in front of the entire company, in front of the entire brigade for their commendable service. There's some pretty noble people around you. And I mean, sitting right here in this congregation, we just take each other for granted. There are some noble and true, admirable people sitting around you. And I don't want to get too much in Twilight Zone, but there are saints. When you and I worship, this place is full of saints who have gone on to be with the Lord, but they love this church and this congregation. They're here as well. And there's some noble and true and admirable angels surrounding you constantly. Every so often I have a friend, their spiritual eyes are open, and they see an angel around them. And they are absolutely amazed. And what I always tell my friends is, I'm so glad your eyes are open. I want to encourage you to remember that these angels are constantly surrounding you. Jesus in the New Testament and in the Hebrew Scriptures make that very, very clear. Whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is honest, it's so wonderful to have honest people. There was a huge bequest from my family that was in a different bank, and Mom didn't have a record of it. So I only knew what I had records of. And all out of the blue, this bank called me here a few weeks ago and said, did you know your parents' trust has this fund? And since they died, we haven't been able to locate. And finally, I located you. The person went to a lot of trouble. The bank could have swallowed up that money. They could have figured out a legal way to not be honest. I profusely thank the bank lady that went to all that research to finally find me, clear up in a different county. Honesty really is something to focus on. A person who does an excellent job, we want to really focus on excellence and commend people who are that way. And all of these things that we're meditating on, we want these to be a part of our life. So if we meditate on the isn't that wonderful things, and we don't meditate on the ain't it awful things, we're going to become more like what we meditate on. We're going to become more wonderful. Like, for example, the wonderful healing to have Martha and Sherry with us today. Let's meditate on the fact that God is in the process of healing them. And of course, we're going to continue to pray for their continued healing, and Martha may be having surgery. But isn't it wonderful that God has healed them to the point where they can worship with us? We want to focus on the things that are just. I don't know about you, but when a police officer brings justice to my neighborhood, when a judge makes a sentence that is very just, I don't take them for granted. We got a new judge in another county where I live, And I was a little worried about him because, those things are political appointments. But some of the judgments this justice of the peace is making are wonderful. This judge has some real insights into people. He was a lawyer for many years before he became a judge. But he's making just judgments that really benefit people. He's not looking at these sentences as punishment. He's looking for true justice that will rehabilitate people. Things of good report. Of course, negative things need to be in newspapers, but things that are of good report are in newspapers too. And I'd encourage you to focus on those things as well. Isn't it wonderful to be with a gracious person? I have a friend, a retired psychiatrist. He's the most gracious man I've ever met in my life, with a few exceptions. It's so much fun hanging out with this guy because he's gracious. He gives people space. He doesn't judge people. He's kind. Even to people that are acting somewhat inappropriate, I've watched him be kind and gracious with them. What a good example for you and me. Jesus was incredibly gracious with people. He put up with the 12 apostles for 3 years. And I was just reading some of the things that Thomas said to Jesus and that Peter said to Jesus this last week. Jesus answered and said a gracious teaching manner with them. We need to focus on the best and the beautiful and the positive. I just love focusing on helpful people, harmonious people. Sometimes you can't be harmonious. Sometimes you have to be real honest. But it's always good to have as the real goal of our lives to, even in that honesty, be gracious and be harmonious. Isn't it wonderful the healing words people say? And a little personal note. I've had a problem with my right foot for the last year. And I've contacted a couple of doctors about it. I had a nurse look at it. They didn't solve the problem. But a friend of mine said, you can go to any store and get these little inserts between your toes. They're gel. And I think that might solve your problem. I'm so gracious to Bruce Ames for telling me that. My doctor couldn't figure it out. The nurse that looked at my toes with a fine-tooth comb couldn't figure it out. But the guy I'm going to go canoeing with on the church canoe trip, I told him my problem. He said, go get those little gel inserts. That might take care of the problem. It's taking care of my problem. I am so grateful, so appreciative of having friends like that. And find healing through advice of friends. Whatever is honorable. Every time I see a military person, every time I see a police officer, every time I see an EMT and it's appropriate, I say, thank you for doing what you do. I'm grateful to them. Every time you hear an ambulance or siren, pray for the people in that ambulance. Pray for the police officer. Pray for the people in the wreck. Be grateful and thankful. Kind and forgiving, they sort of go together, don't they? Everything we're talking about here, these wonderful things, meditating on these things, are eternal values. These are the things that are going to be in heaven. I hate to tell you this, but ain't it awful? It's not going to be in heaven. It's really, really important that you get that out of your life, because that's a big chunk of you. If you're doing the ain't it awful all the time, that's a big chunk of you that's not going to be in the life to come. It's going to be in the place of darkness. If we're constantly putting other people down, ourselves down, our family members down, everybody in our neighborhood down. There's an old joke about a guy, he moved to a new town. And he said to to his neighbor, he said, "What are people like in this town? Are they pretty nice? Or are they pretty difficult to get along with?" And his neighbor was a wise person, and his neighbor said, "Well, what were people like in the town you came from?" And before he could answer, he said, "Don't answer." He said, "I suspect the people in this town will be just like the people the town you came from." In other words, if you're a praising person, if you're a thankful person, and you're going to see people around you as praiseworthy and as thankful, and you're thankful to be with them. If you're a negative person, I'll guarantee you the next town you go to will be a negative town. I've shared this before with you, but the last 50 years I've lived in the beautiful state of Kansas, I've watched a lot of people say, "Well, I hate Kansas, I'm going to move to San Francisco, or to New York, or to Chicago, or to Dallas-Fort Worth, or to Florida." And you know what I've observed the last 50 years? And this is for all you on YouTube that are in other states. I've observed that 2 or 3 years later, a huge percentage of those people are right back in Kansas, because it wasn't so great in some of those cities. A friend of mine, and I can mention her name, Julie. Julie was my associate pastor in Great Big Christian Church in Kansas City, First Christian Church of Olathe. And she got called to a church in Los Angeles. And I said, "Julie, I need to warn you that when you're in LA, it'll take you 2 to 3 hours to get anywhere one way to see somebody in the hospital." "Oh, but it's California, I'll love it." She was back in a church in Illinois in about 3 years. And she said when she got back, she says, "Ron, it takes forever to get." She began to see how nice the Midwest was. So, always thinking there's another place that's going to be better than where we are? No, we need to grow where we're planted. This handout is a handout to learn how to grow where we're planted. It's a wonderful handout. So, look at people and things around you that are pure, that are righteous, that are life-giving, that are beautiful, that are majestic, that are awesome, that are beyond reproach. You know, there's actually some people, believe it or not, they're beyond reproach. You could look at their checkbook, and you'll absolutely know for sure by the checks they've written and who they've written those checks to, they are beyond reproach. One virtue that I added to this list is the word obedient. If you're obedient to your parents, if you're obedient to your teachers in school, if you're obedient to police officers, if you obey the laws of the city and the county and the state where you live, if you're obedient to God, you are going to have a happy life. I have a couple of friends and a couple of family members. They are rebels. They rebel against everything. Simple things like you need to brush your teeth. You have halitosis. I'll brush my teeth when I feel like it. They're driving people away from them. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, "The way of a rebel is hard." The way of a rebellious person is tremendously hard. I've had a lot of patients. They won't quit drinking. They won't take their psychotropic medication. They won't obey the laws. They have terrible, difficult, rebellious, painful lives. Every single one of these meditations has to do with some type of obedience. And especially those of us who are followers of Jesus, if we just try to obey Jesus' laws more and more each day. This passage ends with the blessing. If you can follow these positive things in your life, the God of peace will be with you. And the reason the God of peace will be with you is because you're a peacemaker, because you're a peaceful person, because you've been meditating all your life on God's love. Isn't that a wonderful promise? You're going to have a peaceful ride to heaven. You're going to have a peaceful death. You're going to have a peaceful life. Even if there's turmoil and negative things around you, you're going to have inner peace. It was wonderful to have that Russian surface air missile come at my Black Hawk helicopter and to have peace, to be totally willing to live and totally willing to die. This teaching we're talking about here in Philippians is solid gold. I want to just go over briefly every one of these things. And let me encourage you to take this home. And of course, there's not going to be a test on this. But God constantly tests our lives. But let me encourage you to meditate on things that are holy, glorious, worthwhile, commendable, noble, true, admirable, praiseworthy, honest, excellent, just, of good report, compelling, virtuous, right, gracious. Meditate things that are the best, on the beautiful, the positive, the helpful, the harmonious, the healing, the honorable, the peaceful, the kind, the forgiving, the eternal. Meditate on the pure and the righteous, the life-giving, the beautiful, the majestic, the awesome. Meditate on things that are above reproach, and meditate on trying to be more and more obedient. And the God of peace will be with you.